Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk here. This is about smart interfaces, so really excited to be sharing some Appian with all you guys. So my name is Andrew Zysk. Thank you. My name is Andrew Zysk. Hello. I'm a project leader at Macedon Technologies. I'm a lead developer. I have 7 years of experience, almost 7 years of experience working with Appian. So if any of you guys have been around for that long, you could call me the box layout boy. You could call me the card layout kid. Okay, whatever you prefer. I've been around for a little while, so happy to share any Appian stories with any of you. So just excited to talk about smart interfaces with you today. So let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about what exactly is a smart interface. What is this idea that I've so loosely defined? Why use a smart interface? What's the value of it? We're going to go into some real-life examples as well as how we actually implement that in the code. And we're going to look at use cases in action of how smart interfaces are implemented. So we're going to go from things that feel more familiar, like basic user filters, and we're going to move towards things that are a little bit more niche, particularly when we get to external links to smart interfaces. We'll kind of explain what that means. But so we're going to go kind of in order of more broad and things you might be familiar with to things that are more technical and niche. So that's the order we'll go through. And then, of course, we'll have some time for questions at the end. All right, so what is a smart interface? So I call this, the level 1 version this is an interface that remembers you. You can think of this as like a memory foam mattress kind of interface, okay? It remembers information about you. But for this developer audience, I think you guys probably would know it better as something like a site page that stores and queries information tailored to the logged in user to enhance their experience. So really what it is just personalizing the data that's on the interface for your user. And so when I say that, what you might be thinking of is, well, I have a record list for a record type, and I have user filters, and there's already something built into Appian where I can save that information, right? I can have a user set default filters, they can set their own filter sets, and they can save things for themselves, where when they come back to the screen, it'll default have the filters they wanted. And that would be right. I would say that falls into the category of a smart interface. However, I think we can do a little bit more than that, and records are great and they're really useful, but in the scenarios where you can't necessarily use those record filters, that's where we're going to have to be a little bit more technical about how we're handling things. So let's keep going here. So why use a smart interface? So first of all, it's just a really good user experience. The goal is to delight your users with a beautiful, modern experience. Anytime you guys have used any other software platform or streaming service, when you go into it, it shows things that are meant for you. It shows you products and channels that are recommended to you. And so we can do the same thing with business data as well. Like, let's consider the actual person who's logging in and show them things relevant to them. Number 2 here is reduce the number of actions required to navigate through a complex site page. Pretty much just reduce the number of clicks, right? We want to have a system that is intuitive, don't have to click through layers of filters and interfaces, and we'll see an example of that later. Number 3 here is allow users to jump to a specific view of data without using a record. So as we're talking about having data that's saved that you can get to, it just sounds like a record at first, and that's true. Records are used to drill down into information all the time in our projects, but sometimes you might have something more complex like a report that you want to be able to drill down into right when you get to the page of whatever's relevant to you. So we're going to get into that as well. So what's the example case here? So I'm going to be talking about SPAR, which is a solution that we created at Macedon Technologies. It stands for Sprint Planning Agile Resource. And it's available on the AppMarket. And this in particular is a very specific use case of Appian that isn't very common, but we essentially built an agile project management tool in Appian that people can use to manage their projects. And this developer audience here, we're obviously all familiar with these kind of tools. A lot of different features you need to be able to do to track your tickets, track your boards, pretty dense set of features. And so we came across a lot of scenarios where we had to build interfaces that were very specific and could handle all those filters, and we'll kind of see what that looks like. So first, we're just going to walk through a pretty simple case here of basic user filters. So I'm going to switch over to SPAR now and show you what it actually looks like. So when we look at SPAR on the screen here, it kind of looks like your normal project management board, right? In this case, it's all in Appian, and we could get into the specifics of why that's helpful to have an Appian. You can have a system that kicks off a workflow that will automatically create tickets for you as needed. There's a lot of different benefits you could do to having this in Appian. But that's another story for another time. We're going to focus on the smart interfaces right now. And specifically, you can see there's just a lot of data on the screen, right? We have these columns for things like the size of the story. We have the ticket. whatever project it's associated with, attributes and tags you can associate with different tickets, as well as what sprint you're allocating those tickets into. So there's a lot of information, and then you need filters for all of that too, right? So you can see on the top, there's just so many filters, such that we had to find ways to kind of be creative and see how do we cram as many filters as we can onto this interface. So just a lot of information to deal with. Another thing you could see here is on the left, we have this card so creatively called Zysk. So there, you can have multiple programs as well, because in a program, you can have multiple boards, but then what if I have a totally other program? I need to manage that as well. So there's this kind of layered idea of like what things we need to actually be able to manage in this application. So in here, what we're going to start with is just the board. So in the Zysk program, we have this board here for the development. So what this does is a board is really nothing more than a set of filters here, where we're filtering on all these different things, particularly things that are like in this sprint, right? That's something we would want to filter for. On the other hand, we could just select no board, and we would see more data in here, and then that is just filtering for nothing specifically here. So we can build out boards as we need to. What I do want to show as the smart interface aspect here is when we have this board, so let's say I have no board selected, and then I'm going to refresh my page, it's going to bring me back to the same page, and it won't have the board selected. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like when I select a board, though. Let's say I'm working on this particular project, I have this board filtered, I go away from this page to go do my development task or whatever else it might be, and I come back, I select my board, and then I can just refresh here, and you'll see that actually what populates is the board is already populated when I load back onto the screen. So I call this a smart interface. If you're familiar with this concept, you might just call this a user filter, a basic user filter, right? But we're going to get into more depth on how this can be more useful as well. So let's go back to the slides for a second, and let's just look at how we actually implement that. First of all, for anyone who's not familiar with that, but also just to kind of get more technical here. So in here, we can see on the left here, we have program user state. So really what we're capturing is we have a user, we have a program, and then we have a board within that program. So that's what we have to save to the database, right? So every time we're looking at that data and we're selecting from that dropdown, we're actually saving to that table somewhat quietly, right? The user doesn't really know what's going on, but it's actually saving that data to the database whenever we click something on that dropdown. And then on the right here is saved board. It's really just the structure of a board. The note I'll say here is you can see a board is associated with the program, and then a board also has a filter data JSON in there. And if you've worked with user filters before, you may have used a JSON. There is some flexibility with using a filter data JSON because you don't have to define every field that you're filtering for. You can just have a JSON object in the database as a varchar. You want to be careful about that because if you hit that varchar limit, it's going to be bad. So you just have to make sure you know what you're doing when you're configuring that JSON object as well. The other option is to actually clearly define each one of those columns if you want to do it that way. A lot of Appian code I'm throwing at you here, but really what I'm trying to show here is on the left, this is very simple. The left part is really just when you create the board, so that's just really a button that saves it. In the middle here is where that drop-down field is. So that drop-down field that says what board you're selecting, that is where those user state saves are happening. And that's actually calling an abang start process that's going to write into the database right just from clicking that drop-down. So when you do that, it's actually performing that save. So again, you got to be careful here. I know there's been other talks today about performance as well. You need to make sure that you're not doing anything crazy when you're just clicking on drop-downs here. But as you can see, it's a pretty simple process. It's really just taking in a few parameters and then maybe saving to the record there. For the query side of things, this is where when we come back to the interface, what we're going to have is how do we get the actual data to show to that user? And we can see in program user state view, there it is right there in the top left. So we have the user logged in, we have the program that they're associated with, and what we're asking is what board should they be looking at? And we can see it's all actually being calculated right there. So then below that, we're saying there's the current saved board. Let's move to the middle. There's the query entity we're actually calling to get that. And then on the right side, there's our current saved board actually being presented to us in the interface. You know, these big interface objects that are handling all the filters and the grids and everything like that. So that's really the gist of what we're looking at here. So I do want to show another example of what this looks like with site navigation. So let's just take really the same exact concept we just went through for filters and boards, but we can also apply it to other things that are going to stick and be our memory foam in our interface. So in here, when I go in here, the one that comes to mind is in SPAR, we came up with this other idea of having tabs, and different than a site tab, but it's something we created in SPAR called tabs, because you may want to have different views into a project, right? This is a project management application. There's a lot of different people who need to know a lot of different things about a project. Some people want to see the boards they're working on with the whatever Kanban tickets and things that they're tracking, but then other people might want to see a home screen. Maybe I don't necessarily need to see the ticket level view. I might want to see the top level view of what is the project about, who's staffed on it, all that kind of stuff as well. And so remembering this tab is actually also important too. So just to show that, I'm just going to refresh the page again. And when I refresh it, it's actually going to take me right back to the home page, which is where I had last saved that. So it's the memory foam effect being displayed yet again, but it's really just the same concept in the database. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So in the database, really the same idea here. The other note here I didn't really mention is the program is also sticky. So if we had multiple programs and you want to drill down into one, that's also going to stick there as well. So user state is really just saying, who's my user? What's the last program they looked at? I'll show that one. On the right side here, we have program user state, which is, here's my program, here's my user, and then the same way we had saved board, we actually also have saved tab now. So we can save the tab of, am I looking at home? Am I looking at boards? Am I looking at some other tab that I've configured for my program? So that's really the idea there. Same exact way we do it, just slightly different data structure. And then here it is again with Appian implementation. So I guess the one that matters here is really on the right. So just take a look at the right there. We have the rich text display field there, which is referring to the tab. That rich text is actually those tab links we had. So that was home or boards. That's actually what that is. And you can see right there that it's doing the ABANG write to data store entity. So anytime you click on that and switch tabs, it's also quietly doing that write to data store entity to save that into the database. And then same exact way we did it before. When we query, we can see on the right side here, there it is right there actually. So when we're loading in, we have local bang current tab. And then what we're doing is we are checking for the save tab from that table. So we can actually see that being pulled up to figure out, okay, last thing I selected was home, it's in the database, I'll query it, there it is. So same exact idea in action there. All right, so next up this gets a little bit more technical, but I do want to share this with you guys and kind of challenge you also to think if you can find your own use cases for this next one, because this was a fun one. So this one is going to be going back to boards. And in particular, what we're looking at is this link that says to share board, right-click this link icon and press copy link address. So let's do that now. And so what we actually did in SPAR is we realized that as we were working together on this on different projects, we want to be able to have links to boards. But remember, boards aren't records. They're kind of just this idea that's stored in the database that isn't necessarily a record. The drill down record is the ticket. The board is just this filtered thing on the report. So how do we save that as a link? So we'll get into exactly how to implement that, but I do want to just show kind of what that looks like. So when I get the link, you can actually see the link that I just copied is actually a web API that's calling Appian. So you can see program, there's a program ID there, so program equals 11, board equals 29. So it's actually specifying a program and a board ID. It's kind of hard to demo exactly what this looks like right now, but what it does is it would take me to this specific board and actually pre-filter for that. And this is beneficial because when I'm collaborating with my teammates, I can share a board or I can pin it in a channel or however you want to communicate with your team and say, hey, here's the board I'm working on, or here's the board you just got assigned to. And I can just share you the link, and then it just populates it for you. So that's going to populate right there. So again, very specific use case on why we would do that, but I'm just curious to know if you guys have any other ideas on how you might want to use something like this that is essentially a redirect of a link to data that isn't even really a record. So think about that one. How do we set that up? So let's just go through the API real quick. So on the bottom left, let's start simple. Generating the board URL. Really what we're doing is we're just saying what's the program ID, what's the board ID. Then in the middle here, we have the find board web API. And what that's actually doing is it's calling a stored procedure using ABANG execute stored procedure for query. Because if you look at what that web API is doing, it's calling the stored procedure in the local variable. But then in the HTTP response, that's a 302, that's a redirect, is really what it's doing. It's redirecting you to the original /programs page, but the stored procedure has already executed. So the stored procedure stored that in the database of where that information is actually being saved for that user, so that when they get redirected, it'll actually populate that data with exactly what they wanted to see, which board they wanted to see on the front end. So kind of a cool way to sneak in that right there with the stored procedure and then redirect them so that they're actually seeing data on the front end. One other thing to consider here, though, you could call this security considerations, you could call this error handling. What happens if you're assigned to a program and then your access is later revoked? You wouldn't want access to that anymore, right? The way we handle that is we just have a bunch of checks here that just make sure that first of all, the URL is valid. We have program permissions. Is the board valid? And then what we do is we actually would generate a notification message if any of those things are kind of erroneous in any way. So you could see that kind of nested if logic in the rule on the left there is really showing that if anything goes wrong here, we're going to populate a notification message. And on the right side, we have a notification pop-up. I didn't show it in the demo today because it worked, but really what would happen is if you tried to access something you didn't have access to, it would show up like a red card banner that would say, here's your notification and why you can't access this program. So in our case, we have to be careful about how we actually implement that because we don't want people having access to the wrong things. So we just had to have that error handling. So that was really what I wanted to show you guys about smart interfaces. So this concept can be applied to other things, though, right? I mean, this is a specific use case of Appian that we built for a specific reason, not very common for what we actually implement in Appian. But we can apply this in other ways, too, right? So favorites. If you want to have a favorite set of data or a favorite filter or something like that, you would probably want a way to save that in the database as well, right? So you can think about that as a smart interface that'll automatically bring you to your favorite screen. Page configuration. You could think of something like widgets. If you want to show like specific widgets to users or leave things as collapsed or uncollapsed for, save that data when you're coming back to a screen. Something that's going to be intuitive to the user. Last selected item, we kind of saw something like that. Really just coming back to like whatever item you were looking at on some kind of drill down report and just showing that again when you come back to it. And then also reporting. So this is a fun one because in my case with SPAR, I'm not going to be a micromanager and track what everybody's working on in SPAR and look at the report of what everyone's looking at. I think that's a little much, but there could be a case where you have so many users looking at a report in so many ways that maybe you can see, hey, certain users are looking at this report in certain ways, certain users are using it other ways, and then maybe we can set up the report to be more intuitive for those different groups of people who care about different data. So just another idea there. So recap on this. So we went through a definition of what is smart interfaces, the memory foam mattress. It's remembering the information about you when you come back. The purpose, which is really making a really great, beautiful user experience that is going to be simple. And then we went through the use case of the Macedon SPAR solution for tracking agile projects. And then we went through the specific use cases of basic user filters, more generic site navigation with the tabs, and then interface linking, which is being able to share filters, essentially, share filter sets with other people using links. So that's really, that leads me to the end of my presentation here. So thank you guys so much for your time. Very open to going through some questions as well. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but please take the survey, give your feedback, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Any performance considerations?
Performance considerations?
Because now there's kind of a lot of contextual information, then all the validations and checks, and when you kind of add the user layer on top, like for a couple users it's okay, but when you're involved a couple hundred users.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So your question was about performance considerations. Totally agree with that. So in terms of scale, this is definitely a smaller application. There's not hundreds of people using it. It's more like tens of people. So I would definitely consider that and definitely would do due diligence on load testing for that. I would say just also being careful with the queries, right? Like we were kind of showing like where are these writes happening, where are these queries happening, making sure that we can do those queries in a way where we're not going to pull everything in the table, just making sure you're drilling into who's the specific user, what's the specific program. A lot of it is kind of following those best practices of performance. But I would definitely say if you're going to scale this up to hundreds and thousands of users, definitely consider load testing with having multiple tests of a lot of people clicking on write to data store at the same time. So yeah, definitely like that. Yeah. Sure, over here. Save multiple pages?
Yes.
Oh, so so what you're saying is I'm saving like one particular case of the last thing I visited, right? So you're saying like, could I save other things? I guess you could. I mean, it depends how you would design it. I mean, you could have, you could certainly have like different ways to navigate, I guess, of like things you want to save. Because really what this is it's smart in the sense of it doesn't require the user to configure anything. I don't have to say what my favorite page is. But you could certainly do that of saying, hey, I have my set of favorite filters, and then I can choose which one I'm going to come back to. So.
But would it by default land be the one that's later should stay for me? Like if I have 3 pages saved, right?
Yeah.
If I paste all of it, want to go to one,
Yeah.
what would be the one that it lands on?
Yeah. Well, in this case, it would be, so the stored procedure in this case is really saving it as a link, so it'll always take you to that specific one. But I see what you're saying of like, okay, how do you actually define what, which page you want to save on? That's really up to you as a designer, right? I feel like, to me, this was pretty intuitive to say, bring me back to the last border that I saw, because it's just such a complex report that's what you would want to see. But I could see coming up with another design for another system for sure. Yeah, sure.
Have you ever considered using this for like analytics, to where particularly on the example you had where it'll save the last page that you looked at? In theory, you could sort of count how many times that or other users have looked at
Yeah.
that page, and then maybe if it's like the most popular item on the board,
Yeah.
be suggested or something.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd like that idea a lot. I'm struggling to think of like a way I would actually use that, and obviously, like I said, I wouldn't really want to have analytics on who's looking at what reports for everything, right? But because Appian has logs to see like who visited different site pages as well. What this would allow you to do is have a little more granularity and say who's looking at what filters and like what things actually matter to people. So that would be kind of cool, I feel, especially if there's a lot of users looking at like one really complex report or something that was really important to a system. I feel like that would be really helpful. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right. Any other questions right now? All right. Well, if you see me after this, feel free, come up to me, ask me questions, or we could talk about Appian. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.